Dave Birkett here, Detroit Free Press, live at Radio Row, Super Bowl 59 with Thomas Dimitroff, longtime former NFL general manager, Detroit Lions scout way back in the day, and now president of football operations for SumerSports. Their booth is right across from us over here on Radio Row. Football data analytics company with an emphasis on roster management. Thanks for joining me, Thomas. I appreciate it.
Dave, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
A lot going on here already, right?
Oh, it's Monday, and it's starting to populate here on Radio Row, and only going to get busier, as you know. So let's start with the analytics side of this. You were in football a long time. I mentioned it with the Lions in the 90s. How have analytics changed in football since you got into the business?
So context, when I first started, and I was in Detroit, as you mentioned, right? That was an old school group. If you came to the table with data backing your subjective report, those old boys would be kicking your ass out of the seat because they're saying you don't have a good enough eye and you have to rely on numbers. It's completely changed, right? If you come to the table now without some backing of data, when you're talking about your subjective report and your subjective analysis, you're kind of coming light. I think personally, and this is not hyperbole, that you in the National Football League criminally underutilizes data. And I don't say that derogatorily. I'm just saying, like, there's a lot out there that people could dive into, organizations. It's incumbent upon them to utilize the data to help augment their operation. I still 100% a believer in old school subjective evaluation. You have to have that, but you have to fold in that data out there. I think it's wildly important.
You would know a lot better than I about how the Lions use it. But Dan Campbell, obviously, we know some of the decisions that he makes are born in analytics. What sort of edge does he give the team just with some of his decision making?
Yeah, I think it's funny you say that because we look at that and he did a heck of a job with that, and I think that's a really important thing. And the organization, whether it's Dan or whether it's people supplying, because that's what happens, right? The head coach has to be open-minded enough to take that data and apply it, right? That's one of the things that I've realized in the 3 years I've been with Sumer. I don't come in there telling anyone that I know how to model and I know how to build algorithms. What I do know is I'm a lot more open to the implementation of data, which I think Dan does a really good job with. I think everyone within that building, Brad Holmes, Mike Disner, those guys are all football people that are smart people that I think are going to be mindful and open-minded enough to utilize. And I think that's the big key.
Yeah. No, Dan talks about that too. It's a lot of it comes from his gut, so he has that football instinct, but I think there is a number backing to it. He's a pretty smart guy. As someone who was with the Lions early in your career, what was it like for you to watch the team this year and sort of the success they've had the last couple seasons?
I love watching how they've evolved since Dan's gotten, in the seat, and Brad Holmes. I'm a huge fan of Brad Holmes. I don't spend time and don't know Dan Campbell. I'm very respectful of him and respect what he's done. Brad Holmes, I'm more tied to because of my connections with Les Snead, and Brad and I have a great deal of respect for them and what they do and how they're approaching it. I love it. What I love is they also took a kick in the kneecaps in their own way, right? When they came out, everyone was throwing darts at so many levels. And I remember talking with Aaron Glenn this year prior to him getting the job, and his point was we stood by what we believed in, and kudos to Dan Campbell on that, right? It's easy to abort the mission when everyone's throwing darts and criticizing you for hiring certain people as your coaches who are former players. Everything that was, critical of him, he stayed the course, and I think it's great to see it. I mean, it's obviously very disappointing that it ended the way it did, and I was happy for Dan Quinn, of course, because Dan Quinn and I worked for 6 years with the Falcons, obviously with the Commanders. But look, where Detroit is now I have been thinking a lot, like I'm sure you all have, is okay, you're losing both coordinators, and your quarterback is at a spot. It's an interesting spot in his career. How is this all going to play out? This is an important time for this organization, for Brad and Dan and everyone to get the right coaches in place and continue to build, because this can go two ways. I'm confident it's going to go in the right direction, but just very important to make sure that you're very thoughtful in how you're going to build this, not only the players, but of course the coaches and the management that you have in place.
Well, you mentioned Aaron Glenn. Obviously, the Lions lost Aaron. They lost Ben Johnson. They've lost 8 assistant coaches so far this offseason, which is a ton of turnover, even if they still have a really good roster. I think you took the Falcons to the Super Bowl 2016. best offense in the NFL. Came back the next year, still had a good season, but the offense, wasn't quite as productive. As you look at what the Lions have and how they are replacing it, how big of a loss is losing 8 coaches, losing both of your coordinators, and how, what does it take for a team to overcome some of that?
That is a big deal. I mean, that's a big deal. Now, the great thing that you have is the offensive line is so talented. We know that, right? Both sides of the ball, you're obviously giving back your stud player. Now you continue to build. I think this is a great year for pass rushers, right, in the draft. Yep. Continue to build and make sure, but
some depth at least that they need to add maybe one.
Yes, of course, right. And I guess what I'm saying in all of that, let Brad Holmes do his part in making sure that he has the right players coming in. Let him be the part of, sort of communicating with Dan Campbell on how they're going to bring in some of the right people. They have not hired, right? I want to make sure. Have they hired the coordinators yet? Or they're in
John Morton is going to take over from Denver. Will be the offensive coordinator.
Okay.
Kelvin Shepard will be promoted from defensive coordinator. So keeping one internal, and John was with, of course, Lions fans know this. John was with the Lions in 2022, sort of helped Ben Johnson get that offense set. So there is some sort of, backdrop with him and Jared Goff that they've had a past relationship.
I think it starts from the very, very top, of course, with your Lions owner and how she approaches everything. And then, of course, you have, Chris Spielman in there doing his part. I just think that Rod Wood, of course, that whole group, right? They know what they're doing now. They've been through it. It's just getting over the edge here, getting over the hump, right? Which, I know that's complicated. And I wasn't around watching after that loss. Was it a downtrodden community for 10 days?
Still is, I think. Yeah. They think they should be here, no doubt.
Yeah, I understand that. And again, most people do probably think that. But I guess in the very end, to answer your question, it can be resurrected. It can come back strong. I think the big thing is, again, back to your quarterback and where Jared Goff is that way. And these teams that go out there, there are some really smart D coordinators, and they're going to find those little nuances of how they want to rattle Jared Goff. And that's, right or wrong, whatever happened with the shot in his face, and if it put him off a little bit, you don't know. No one knows, of course, but I think quarterbacks out there, if you can rattle them in a certain way, a lot of these defensive coordinators think they're just going to keep coming on that. So not to get into that, that's a whole different conversation, of course. But
well, a couple more minutes here with Thomas Dimitroff, SumerSports. I was talking to Sam, one of your data analysts over there, fantasy hosts, and we were talking about maybe how the offense would look a little bit different, right? Maybe it means a few more screen plays in the red zone instead of some of the trick plays that Ben ran. I don't necessarily need your thoughts on how it would look different yet, but when you guys lost Shanahan, how did the offense look different? How long did it take the group that you had coming back to get accustomed to a new system?
Yeah, I mean, we ended up, that was a tough loss for us, of course, and Sarkisian was who came in after that, and I think he's a heck of a coach. We see what he's done at Texas, of course. I don't know. I think the big thing is making sure that, Sam, I'll be interested to see what Sam mentioned. Did he give you any data on that at all?
Yeah, he did. I'll share some of it right here real quick. He said the Lions last year were 28th in pass rate over expected in the red zone, which is, and you think of some of the way that they used that offense, that they ran the ball a lot. And he said Denver, where John Morton comes from, pass game coordinator for Sean Payton last year, of course, they were 6th in pass rate over expected in the red zone. They threw the ball a lot more down there. And so, again, just thinking of how maybe it might look a little bit different was maybe you're still using Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, but in a different way down there.
Yeah, and you guys know, those running backs that you have, and hopefully Montgomery heals fully, right? Yeah. But Gibbs, every time I watch him play, and don't get me off on a tangent here because I love the way the guy runs. And we can go on and on about running backs and everything, but the value to that is obviously very, very important, as well as I'm a huge tight end guy, right? This is going to be an interesting situation to see how you guys continue to build and cultivate that offense after, again, the changes. But I think Sam's giving you really good information. That's why we have some wildly intelligent people there. Our group of data analysts and scientists and engineers in SumerSports, I call them propeller heads, and I say that lovingly. They can put their propeller on, and they are incredibly smart, and we all have to help talk them in an area from a football perspective, right? Because there's so much out there that we think that teams can utilize. Obviously, it's important, and to answer these kind of questions, we think it can be helpful.
Well, it's a must subscribe for anyone out there in the fantasy world to understand some of that. Obviously, there's a team component to that too. We'll get into that here in one sec. I did want to ask you one other thing. Just news for today. Myles Garrett had asked for a trade from the Cleveland Browns. What would it take to get a guy like that? And the Lions are, I've gotten about a dozen emails already. Brad Holmes comes from the F them picks sort of school of, would you do that if you were in the Lions situation?
Well, I was pretty outspoken about the Raiders, and you guys trading with the Raiders when all that went down. Of course, Max Crosby didn't end up in Detroit,
right? So
I love the idea of it. What would it cost? Oh my gosh, that's two firsts. That is a lot of
Khalil Mack type package.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got to be that. It's a lot. You have to be ready to invest in that, and you have to understand. I think on those situations, you also have to know how those two guys are going to pair. Right? I'm talking about. Who you already have along that D line, of course, that's always an important thing because sometimes that can work in your favor and other times it can be a little bit misguided and all of a sudden it's not exactly what you planned. That's a huge investment, but I'm sure the faithful are thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I know Lions fans are at the very least, even if Brad Holmes hasn't got to that point yet. All right, so let's wrap this up with SumerSports. Tell me a little bit more about your role right now and in the role that you guys play for some teams in the NFL.
Yeah, so we right now we have 5 NFL committed teams, multi-year deals with us, and that's one of those things. In third party, you hit the ground. It's always toughest to get the first clients, right? Same with the NCAA. We have 7 programs we're working with right now. We're hiring. We probably have 75 strong on our team across the board, right? So we've moved from 3 of us back 3 years ago to a really growing, budding company. And again, our biggest thing right now is making sure that we are providing great reports along with great advanced data for teams to utilize. And I think that's a big thing for us. If there's some companies out there called Blesto and National, they're scouting combines. A lot of people do know about them. And we don't think that we're a replacement for them necessarily. We think that we're a really good supplement to some of the programs out there. And we're excited about it. And again, 600 years of experience on our staff. So guys like Brad Holmes, he knows everyone on our staff. So those are the kind of things that I think are helpful. It's always good to have outside information. We grade 800 college players a year for the draft, but we also grade 2,200 in the league. So for a pro personnel company, or for a pro personnel department to take a company like us and say, hey, we have our scouts that are giving us this. What does Sumer say? Interesting. It's a good juxtaposition. It doesn't override. It generates more discussion and more research to go into making the right decisions. We're really excited about it. We're backed by a guy named Paul Tudor Jones. Paul's a world-class macro trader, UVA guy, and he's a big proponent of what we're doing. So luckily we have his backing.
Well, I know there's plenty of NFL teams out there that love that data. They use it as a supplement to their own in-house stuff and everything else they have. And as I mentioned, there's a fantasy component out there as well for all you fantasy players out there. So he's Thomas Dimitroff. SumerSports is the name of the company. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. And thanks for joining me here on Radio Row, Super Bowl 59.
Appreciate you.